Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another live at the Waterhole with Wild Earth and African. My name is Ben Coley. I will be your naturalist for the next couple of hours, and we will enjoy all the sights and hopefully the sounds from our wonderful locations right the way across Eastern and Southern Africa. And it looks like we've started out with a very familiar scene over the last few weeks of some elephant bulls enjoying Oldonyo Water Lodge, Oldonyo Waterhole up at Kenya in the Tolu Hills National Park. But as always, just a reminder, this is live and interactive. You can send through your questions and comments, and I'll do what I can to answer them. It gives me some great things to think about, helps funnel the brain to certain areas, dredge up some of those long lost facts which are stuck somewhere in the base of my cerebellum. And I've also got access to a library and of course online resources. And it's a great challenge for me to try and answer some of the fabulous questions that you guys keep sending through. But for now, let's just enjoy this lovely group of elephant bulls as they water themselves. Lots and lots of drinking going on. I'm sure we'll see some spraying, trying to cool down in that oppressive heat. Very dry conditions this time of year up in Kenya and down here in South Africa, where I'm coming to you from. And we'll see if this very brave zebra is allowed an opportunity to drink, but I somehow doubt it. Yeah, it's a rather dismissive, I shall flick water in your general direction from the elephant in the middle. We've seen this quite a lot recently. A youngster, I'd be interested to know if it is the same one. I must try and look for some distinguishing features. Who likes to take up residence right in the middle of the waterhole and protect it against anybody else coming down for a drink. As all these elephants at Old Donyo are relatively tolerant to other animals coming down. So they often have a big queue waiting for their chance, but these elephants do seem to be quite stationary a lot of the time. They take this opportunity to just have a little bit of a standing doze. I think just enjoying this close proximity to water. Why go anywhere else if you've got it to hand? Interesting to see a couple of birds on this elephant bull on the right. One has to assume those are oxpeckers. Generally speaking, you never really see oxpeckers on elephants. They don't like them. They swat them away with their trunks. And so elephants have very few ticks on those upper parts of the bodies. Underneath the armpits, around the groin and the anus region, yes. But I think those oxpeckers probably just taken the opportunity to alight somewhere and enjoy the vista. I think that might actually be the first time I've ever seen an oxpecker on an elephant, even if only briefly. Don't know what you might see. Potentially a somewhat pregnant zebra, this one with her backside facing towards us. You can see how distended that stomach is. Zebras, of course, always do look quite chunky, just because of their digestive system. They are hindgut fermenters, which means that just like elephants, rhinos, horses, warthogs, they just have the one stomach, and then they have an enlarged storage container at the back of the stomach, which is known as a cecum, um, within which the bacterial fermentation of that sort of roughage that they are consuming is processed. It looks as if we were having one or two feed issues there, so we've ducked down now to Rosie's Pan, all the way down in the Olifants West Game Reserve, so part of Greater Kruger National Park. Another young bull enjoying a drink. Happy to see the glistening reflection of the sun on the water there being accentuated by the ripples. You can see the sun is pretty high in the sky this time of day, just after midday here in Africa. You can see that just with the position of the sun in the water, but also look at the shadow of that elephant not casting a very long and deep shadow. So theoretically the hottest time of the day, although it does tend to warm up a little bit more in the afternoon because the Earth has had more time to bake under the heat of the sun and radiates into the ambient temperature. Of course, in winter, the sun never climbs as high in the sky as it does in the summer. It's one of the reasons that we get the more oppressive temperatures in the summer, just because of the angle of the Earth's tilt versus the angle at which the sun's rays hit us. So in African summer, the sun is basically directly above the Tropic of Capricorn, and in winter, it's above the Tropic of Cancer, which is north of the equator, meaning the sun doesn't climb as high in the sky, even in the middle of the day for us. That means those sun's rays are spread out over a much greater area and lose some of their potency. Which describe it, it's a little bit like holding a torch over a piece of paper. If you're holding that torch directly at 12 o'clock or at 90 degrees to that piece of paper, you get a very focused beam of light. Whereas if you hold it at a more acute angle, then you get that same beam of light spread out over a much larger distance, and its effect is diluted somewhat. That is ultimately the crux of why we have different seasons, and because of the tilt, why northern hemisphere seasons are directly opposite one another. Tom C, good afternoon to you. You're asking what type of cameras are used at these waterholes. Tom, honestly, I have absolutely no idea. I, like you, am only privy to the views that we get from the cameras rather than actually seeing the cameras. I obviously have seen the one at Juma before. I know what it looks like, but from a technological standpoint, I'm afraid I am utterly clueless as to give you any of the specs of those cameras. Why the animals don't go near it? Well, I guess to them it's just another part of the environment. I'm sure when it's first put up, those more curious animals like elephants will probably go and investigate it, decide that it is not a threat, it's just a new strange thing in their environment, and they very quickly learn that it's not a threat and to ignore it. It was interesting when we were lucky enough a couple of days ago to have that beautiful leopard live on the camera at Jabalani's waterhole. That when the camera did move around, the leopard did suddenly look up and make eye contact with the camera and sort of investigate it. But I would imagine that was because of a more of the electrical humming of the motors turning the camera, possibly just the movement out of the corner of its eye. Of course, leopards incredibly alert to movement in their environment, very, very good eyesight. But she didn't deem it a threat. It didn't disturb her to the point where she wanted to move off and did so on her own accord a little bit later. We have had problems when baboons have attacked the cameras, but again, they're just being playful. The wires that feed the power supply to the cameras are perfect little climbing frames and jungle gyms, and the baboons do like to utilize them. And very occasionally, they do chew on the rubberizing around the cables. Nobody quite knows why, because they can. There is some suggestions that it's to do with the sort of the low frequency hum, or maybe to do with the texture. One of the reasons perhaps that rats have a tendency to chew on cables is because they're sort of the electronic signals being given off are of interest to them and stimulate certain types of behavior. But yeah, I'm afraid I can give you no specifications in terms of the cameras themselves. One elephant in the foreground here was just having a lovely little snooze there in the shade. A lazy Tuesday afternoon. And a bit of a stretch. Could see the wave during the whole last few minutes. We stood there motionless, trunk resting on the ground, legs sort of quite widely spread, just taking the load. The ability, of course, that elephants have to lock those knee bones pretty much, and sleep standing up. You can see that as a very relaxed pose, rather sullen looking eyes, very much having what we would consider a sleep and just allowing those trunk like legs to hold up the body weight. Of course, takes a lot of energy for an elephant to stand up after lying down. We were asked about that yesterday, and they do indeed lie down from time to time, usually at least once in a 24-hour period, but normally only for sort of half an hour or so at a time, where they'll get some deeper sleep. They will take the opportunity to rest up during the heat of the day in the shade before they get back to that day, which is chocked full of feeding and not much more. 18, 20, maybe even 22 hours a day of processing that food for that stomach to digest. As we were saying, that large stomach, very, very long intestines, but that specialized fermentation chamber known as the cecum, which is where all the fermentation of that food takes place before going on into the intestines for absorption processes. But still not a very efficient digestive system at all, unfortunately. Generally, we work on about 40% efficacy for an elephant's digestion. Some studies have it as low as only sort of 20 to 25% is of goodness that they actually are able to extract from all of that food that they're eating. And so probably no coincidence that a lot of the larger animals, the elephants, the rhinos, the horses, um, are larger because they need larger stomachs and larger cecums to deal with that lack of efficiency in their digestion. Okay, well, we'll leave these elephants to their little afternoon doze. Let's head up to Madikwe to Tau. And an ostrich. Very nice. Don't get to see these very often. I'd say Tau is one spot that we are lucky enough to see ostriches from time to time. This is a beautiful male. You can tell that just from the black coloration of his plumage, of his feathers. Females are brown in color when you see them. I was lucky enough to see a couple of ostriches going through Kruger a few weeks ago. Amazing things, very prehistoric looking. And all that ostrich is thinking, just enjoying the view, I suppose. But no sign of any females in tow. They are what are called polygynous species, ostriches, so one male will have multiple female mates, and they'll ultimately all sort of use the main or the same nesting site. So the I suppose you could call her an alpha female. It's not really the right terminology, but hopefully you understand what I mean. The preferred female, the top dog amongst his ladies. She will lie on the nest and incubate those eggs, and the other, what they call minor females, will lay their eggs surrounding her, so making it sort of one big nest with multiple mothers. The idea, of course, being the most dominant female will have the best protection, with those eggs being at the center of the group. Of course, those eggs are a wonderful source of protein and nutrition for many other animals, particularly jackals, well known for attacking ostrich eggs, hyenas as well, and many people as well, a great source of energy for people. And we see that in ancient stories and in ancient rock art as well. Some of you may well know the Pleiades star cluster up in the sky, otherwise known as the Seven Sisters. There are stories suggesting that the Bushmen associated that little grouping of stars with a nest filled with ostrich eggs because its visibility used to coincide with ostrich breeding season. Of course, it is worth noting that calendars have changed many times over the years. There's what's called precession, where the Earth wobbles around on its axis. So the dates today don't add up to what they would have done thousands of years ago. So it can sometimes be a little bit confusing. But I think the nicest story in the stars with regard to the ostrich is actually referring to those dark patches in the Milky Way itself. If you've ever been lucky enough to view the Milky Way, particularly in the southern hemisphere where it's high overhead under non-light polluted skies, you see that white band going across the sky. But you will also notice that there are dark lines running through it in dark patches, what we call dust lanes, which are exactly that. They're big clouds of dust and gas blocking out the starlight from behind it. And ancient tribes not only drew shapes between the stars, but also saw things or shapes within those darker patches. And we've got very good evidence that in some Aboriginal tribes they saw a giant celestial emu in the sky, and also suggestions that the Bushmen saw a giant ostrich, where the head of the ostrich is what's known as the coal sack, the very dark patch right next to the Southern Cross, very famous constellation in the Southern Hemisphere. And then its long neck stretches down the Milky Way through the pointer stars, Alpha, Beta Centauri, and then sort of the body opens up around the core of the galaxy around Sagittarius and Scorpio. But it's interesting to see that ancient civilizations not only used the stars, but also the darker patches in the Milky Way to imprint their stories. And once you see it, you'll never unsee it. It's so obvious when somebody points it out to you, but until such time, we would never have noticed it. Also, having spent some time in New Zealand, there's a kiwi as well in the dark patches of the Milky Way, as seen by the Maori tribes and cultures. An interesting discipline of astronomy that is often not discussed in great detail. You'll particularly see it in long exposure photography, where you get a greater contrast of the light and the shadows due to the sensors of the cameras. If you've never tried to take a photo of the Milky Way, you should. It is absolutely spectacular. Lisa, yes, it is true. Ostriches don't have preen glands or uropygial glands like many other birds do. Um, it's not quite so necessary to keep their feathers in such good condition because they don't fly and they avoid going into water. So no, no sign of a preen gland in an ostrich. I am assuming, although I'll have to double check, that they may well have what's called powder down, which some birds also possess. Uh, when you don't have a preen gland, if you still need to keep your feathers in relatively good condition, there is a particular type of feather, the downy feather on the chest, or a particular area of that those feathers, which are continuously growing, and they sort of flake apart and create a powder which the bird passes through its feathers. And it acts sort of in the same way, not so much as a waterproofing, but contains some important um, I suppose vitamins or minerals or whatever the right word is, but just to help keep those feathers nice and clean and deal with the problem of parasites. But no, no preen glands in an ostrich. I'll have to check whether ostriches even do have powder down. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't actually, now I think about it. Because they have no need to keep their feathers in good condition. You can see how fluffy the ostrich feathers are. They don't need to interlock like birds that fly to create a nice smooth surface. So those birds have all got little barbs and barbacules. There's little hooks on a feather. So if you've ever picked up a feather and run your fingers the wrong way along the feather, you see it all looks rather ragged afterwards. But all you have to do is sort of re-zip up the feather by running with the grain, and all those little hooks engage again, and the feather's structure is returned very, very quickly. But you can see an ostrich feather is very, very fluffy in appearance. It lacks those little appendages. You also do see ostriches dust bath quite regularly. They'll lie in the sand and wiggle around and cover themselves in dust. So that will also have the same effect of just helping to maintain those feathers and shift any ectoparasites. Lots of activity from our builder, this lone male waterbuck. A little bit of a disagreement. That looks like the dominant bull, the territorial bull, possibly just flexing his muscles with one of the young males there. Quite like the fact that here at Tau there's this big area of sort of barren no man's land between the vegetation behind and the waterhole. It gives the effect that these creatures just keep appearing as if from nowhere and then make their way across this deserted area coming down to the water. It's amazing. The animals just disappear into the background and then reappear. We've got these two bulls coming down to enjoy a drink by the look of it. An ostrich still picking his way across the terrain. Jesse, I suppose you could consider feathers as hair in regard to the fact that they are there to provide an insulating layer and protective layer above the skin. But they don't just sort of continuously grow until they fall off. Birds will molt their feathers throughout the year. Some of them do so sort of all at once, but generally speaking, they will constantly regrowing these feathers. And it's again, I'm sure there are exceptions, but as a rule, most birds will develop a whole new set of feathers every year. That's why you find lots of feathers lying around. Yes, of course, some are lost during predator-prey interactions. Molting is very important, particularly in those birds that go between breeding and eclipse plumage. So some of those male species that completely change their colorations every year, they will shed all those duller coloured feathers and then regrow the brighter coloured feathers for the breeding season. And when the breeding season's finished, they'll get rid of those and return to the more muted colours to avoid being obvious to predators. So you get different types of molt, where as to sort of how much and how often they molt, but pretty much in general, once a year, a bird will completely restock its feather contingent. One of the most famous examples of that, of course, is the ubiquitous hornbills that we see all over the place down here in southern Africa. And when they go into their nesting behavior, when the female goes into a natural cavity in a tree, she seals herself in, and then she will molt all of her flight feathers at once, which means she can no longer fly, but that's fine because she has entombed herself in a natural cavity. And then while she is incubating the eggs, she will then grow new flight feathers, new tail feathers for the next season. Indeed, Tilapau. Yes, anting does occur in South Africa, in birds in South Africa as well. So anting is yet another more, you could say, interesting way of keeping your feathers in good condition. So you do get some species of birds that will actually seek out um, I'm going to say herds of ants, colonies of ants is probably a better word. And they will actually sort of lie down and let the ants swarm over their feathers. And it is believed that the reason for that is twofold. One is, again, to protect against any parasites in the hope that the ants will eat any small parasites that are living in and amongst the bird's feathers. And also by agitating them. And you do see, it has been recorded in certain species that they will actually pick up an ant and sort of wipe it through their feathers. The ant, in response to being grabbed, will be producing that formic acid through the acidophore at the end of its abdomen. Those of you who've been bitten or stung by an ant will know that. Generally, if you are bitten by an ant, it's particularly painful because they simultaneously spray that formic acid into the wound site, leading to the unpleasant feelings that we get. The pugnacious ants are very well known to do that over here, as the name suggests. And it's thought that, say, by anointing themselves with this formic acid, it acts like a natural insect repellent as well, which is very, very clever on behalf of the birds. In terms of which species in South Africa do practice it, I'm not 100% sure. I know that some species of weaver have been recorded doing so, but I'd have to do some research as to which ones are specifically well known for hunting. But yes, it does happen. I don't think I've ever witnessed it. I've seen footage of it and photos of it, sort of birds lying in the sand with their wings outstretched. Obviously read about it in books, but I don't think it's something that is physically witnessed out here very, very often. But I'll have a quick look and see if I can find if there are specific species that are well known for anting over here in South Africa. Okay, it seems that Cape weaver, village weaver, Hollop's golden weaver, southern red bishops, and red-billed quelias have been recorded doing it at a quick glance, and I have no doubt there will be others as well. So you've also mentioned that you've seen crows doing it where you are in the States, so I assume that it would therefore be safe to have a guess that the crow family, the corvidae family out here have probably been noted practicing the same techniques. Very, very clever, isn't it? to use an insect to your benefit and the secretions of it shows it's a form of using a tool, I suppose. It requires knowledge of what to do, and the upshot of you grabbing an ant and running it through your own feathers. The hornbills also do something similar with millipedes. They will collect millipedes or pick up millipedes, agitate them, cause the millipedes to do what we call reflex bleeding, where they secrete a chemical through the spiracles in their skin, and then they have been known to wipe that around the entrance to those nests to keep away potential predators and especially parasites. We have obviously returned back to Oldonia in Kenya to come back to these ellies, also very well known for tool use and self-medicating themselves. We did have a very brief discussion yesterday, sort of speaking about parasites and things about mosquitoes and the use of quinine, which is often found in tonic in terms of an insect repellent. I did do a little bit of reading on that. Certainly, that trying to remember the name of the tree now, but the colcin tree that produces quinine. Um, Certainly, it is suggested that quinine can be effective in the treatment of malaria, but not so much so in terms of acting as an insect repellent. So this idea of drinking gin and tonic may in fact not be helping you to avoid being bitten by mosquitoes. It's just unfortunately the way of the world that some people are more susceptible to mosquito bites than others. It just has to do with the secretions that are given off by your skin, the pheromones, the chemicals, even down to your DNA can have an effect. Some people, I'm one of those people, I don't get very many mosquito bites, but others will get absolutely ravaged by mosquito bites. Okay, sorry again, we seem to be struggling a bit with the feed at Oldonio, so we've gone over to Onguba, one of our newer cameras in Etosha National Park, and another herd of blue wildebeest. But yeah, I did do a little bit of reading on sort of what attracts mosquitoes, and one of the things they do key in on is carbon dioxide, as do many parasitic insects and even predatory insects. So if you have a slightly higher metabolism than another person, there's a better chance that you'll be giving off more carbon dioxide and attracting more mosquitoes. So if you have been exercising, your metabolism, your heart rate is higher. And also, unfortunately, the consumption of alcohol can all lead to extra carbon dioxide production, which may well make you a more fanciable target for a mosquito. But there are various natural remedies that you can use to help to try and protect yourself, although, of course, none of them are 100% effective. A lot of the prescribed or suggested things that you can buy, many of them have not really been proven. These bands that you get and these things that you plug into a wall that give off certain frequencies of sound, flashing lights, none of them have really been proven to be particularly effective. And in fact, some studies have even suggested those ones giving off sound may even be attracting mosquitoes. So there's some good advertising gimmicks and marketing gimmicks that to be aware of. But there are a few natural ones that do work. So citronella and some of the other essential oils, cinnamon oil, clove oil, these have all been shown to be quite um, effective at warding off mosquitoes from alighting on your skin. Uh, there are other plants that we also use out in the bush that we can apply to ourselves, things like wild aniseed, wild basil. These could be rubbed onto the skin and apparently do help to keep mosquitoes away, probably because you are So anointing yourself with chemicals that are unpleasant to any alighting mosquitoes. They did do some experiments. I did read about one where they tried caffeine and quinine on the skin to ward off mosquitoes, and in low doses it didn't make much difference. But once the dosage got particularly high and was then applied to the skin, then yes, it did have an adverse effect to mosquitoes. But I'm not sure, obviously, what the health considerations are for things like that. The most effective chemical to be using is DEET, but we don't really, I'm not a big fan of it because it is toxic in heavier doses. I think the most effective thing you can do is burn elephant dung, which may sound rather pleasant. Tested way of reducing mosquitoes, and the nice thing is elephant dung smolders for hours and hours and hours. And despite the fact that you are burning elephant dung, it actually doesn't smell. It always reminds me a little bit of sandalwood, which is just as well when you're burning dung. Okay, I think we're going to pop down to the Eastern Cape now, to Founders Lodge. Ah, lovely. Some low shot views of some zebras having a drink. We did, of course, see a rhino here yesterday, which was very, very nice to see. Stunning with the reflections of those zebras. The light always seems to be so beautiful on this camera. Oh, look at that big yawn. Lovely view of the Mohican haircut, that mane standing up on end. One of my favourite things about zebras is the way that the stripe pattern remains all the way up into the mane. And it is one of those things that we can look at to give us an idea of the condition of the zebra. You're never really going to find a skinny zebra because of that digestion we were speaking about earlier. Whenever you're breaking down bacteria and fermenting things, the byproduct of that is gas, which is why zebras do often look quite bloated and rotund in appearance. And whilst they also pass a lot of gas as well, particularly when they get a fright or start running. So even an unhealthy zebra is unlikely to be particularly skinny, but if their mane starts flopping over to one side, that might be a sign that your zebra is struggling. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of fat reserves in the neck of the zebra. A zebra is quite a fatty animal anyway, but the thing that is keeping that mane erect and upright is fat deposits within the neck. And if there's a problem with the digestion or the animal is sick and not getting enough nutrition from what it's eating, the body will start to defend itself or try to help itself, and it will start digesting some of those fat reserves in the neck that will then remove this stabilizing influence of the mane, and that long hair on the mane will start to fall over to one side or the other. Serena, you're asking about the difference between plain zebras and mountain zebras, two of the species we do get down here in southern Africa, and whether or not we can tell the difference by looking at their face. Um, my gut says not really by looking at the face. The ears, perhaps, because Cape Mountain zebras have slightly sort of longer ears than a plain zebra. The main difference in terms of markings will be to look at sort of this area of the zebra, really, that area around the top of the flanks or top of the thighs. On mountain zebra, there's a very, we sort of describe as a gridiron pattern. It's a very distinctive um, way in which the black and the white stripes are orientated on the top of the back thighs. And also we look at the legs, the and the belly. So you can see these plain zebras have stripes all the way down their legs. Those stripes almost meet at the belly line, in the middle of the animal, underneath. But in Cape Mountain zebras, they have white bellies and much whiter legs, probably as a result of needing to reflect the heat from all the rocky substrates that they are on in hot areas. Okay, it seems we're having a few camera issues today, but that's all right. We have zoomed all the way northwest back up to Tower Game Lodge, and had our ostrich is still hanging around, and our elephant creating some clouds of dust. Lovely to see all these elephants lumbering around at Tower. You can just see all of that old elephant dung that's scattered across the area there. Very, very good to try and help that soil recover. Obviously, takes a beating from all of these animals coming down. There'll be lots and lots of seeds in there because of that inefficient digestion that have now got access to lovely piles of fertilizer. And so it is a very effective compost as well. A lot of people use elephant dungs in their gardens because of the ability for then that um, all that undigested material to decompose, and plenty of nitrogen and phosphorus, which is important for any soil and for food for plants. And of course, there's this interesting thing that's, well, it's been happening for many years, but it's becoming more mainstream in terms of sustainable tourism and helping the locals to have something to show and to sell to tourists, whereby elephant dung is made into paper. There are various places you can go and you can see the process happening and buy elephant paper. Ultimate recycling. You can clearly see the wind is blowing from left to right. It's one of the things when we start going on walks, it's a good thing to have what we call an ash bag with you. So basically, you scoop up the very, very fine ash after a campfire and put it into something. A sock works perfectly well, and you just tie a knot in that sock and you carry that in your bag and you just give it a little shake, and that will give you a really accurate reading of the wind direction, even when you yourself can almost feel no wind. Such the that ash is so fine that even a tiniest breeze, you'll be able to get wind movement. And that's very important when considering the direction and how to approach animals, particularly with elephants, because of their sense of smell. Always best to approach when you are downwind from the animal to not give away your position. Eddie, for first time safari goers, what is the animal they're most excited to see? I think, honestly, in my experience, it differs between the sexes. So generally, the men want to see elephants and lions, um, probably because they're big and powerful. So they're normally top of the list for the boys. The ladies, most of them are really excited to find a giraffe. There is something incredible about a giraffe. It was actually named the most iconic sort of safari animal many times. It has been in the past by a long way. I think probably just because it's so unique. But yeah, a lot of ladies seem to want to see zebras and giraffes, whereas the boys go for elephants and lions. Everybody, of course, wants to tick off the, in inverted commas, big five animals, just because of the marketing and social media and the sort of stigma attached to it. Um, and that's it's a problem with tourism, but it is the big five is marketed so heavily it does um, work at the detriment of a lot of other animals. We have a magnificent seven, which includes cheetah and wild dog as well. So those seven: zebra, giraffe, hippo, crocodile, which we just saw one moving around in the water there. They're all pretty much top of most people's lists. But they would be the four, I would say. Elephant and rhino for, sorry, elephant and lion for the men, and giraffe and zebra for the women. But of course, everybody is unique. But it is lovely to watch people's reactions the first time that they see any of these animals. It's something that I always felt as a guide. There's a very sort of cathartic exchange of emotions and experience that goes on between a guide and guests. We are in a hugely fortunate position where we get to see these things on a fairly regular basis. And sometimes, it is possible to get nonchalant. Oh, there's another elephant, and oh, there's an elephant in the way. I'm just trying to get past it. But when you have people who see these animals for the first time and they are so moved and so in awe of what they're seeing, it really does help to remind us what an incredible experience and how fortunate we have been and we continue to be able to see these animals on a regular basis. And so I also noticed that if you are a good guide and you're able to, or you have the ability to interest your guests in things that they weren't aware they were interested in, be it insects, be it birds, be it trees, particularly the cultural and medicinal and spiritual uses of local tribes for trees. But that's very important from a guiding perspective to read your guests. You sort of throw all these tidbits out there as you're going around, and it's important that you take note of the responses, which ones seem to elicit um, added interest, and then you can start focusing on those and trying to build the safari experience what your guest wants as opposed to what you think is interesting. But if you yourself are also enthusiastic about the topic, you'll be amazed your guests become as well. You do get people who have real specific interests and want to see very specific things as well. I think before we go on, let's head back up to Eldonia in Kenya and see what's happening at the waterhole. The queue of giraffe waiting for an opportunity. But no, I've had guests come and basically said all they want to do is see leopards. They'll leave anything else to see leopards. They don't mind how many leopards they see as long as they're seeing leopards. I've had people that are very keen birders, and even ones who are coming to find specific species because they want to tick them off the list. I remember one lady who didn't matter what else we saw as long as she saw as many lilac-breasted rollers as possible. That would always make her day as well. So yeah, everybody has their own particular interests. A sneaky eland or two also coming in. Very lucky to have seen some eland over the last few days. Magnificent creature. Three of Africa's biggest mammals here, actually, excluding obviously hippo and rhino, but all of these animals pushing close to a ton, or the big male elands will be pushing close to a ton or more. It's like the other giraffe have given up and they've left it to this young male to see if he's plucky enough to try his luck. Let him have a drink, elephants. Yeah, thought better of it. I feel that should be a little bit of test out. You should get a little ticket and have to wait your turn. Grant DMV, yeah, very much winter is the season that elephants will be digging for water if they can't find access to permanent water like this. Remember, elephants don't really want to drink stagnant, stale water. It's not very nice, and they are quite picky. But this is pumped, so a regular supply of fresh water. But particularly in the middle of winter, obviously it'll change depending on the area and depending on the seasonal availability of rains. But down here in southern Africa, South Africa, yeah, this winter is peak elephant digging season, so you'll often find evidence of that in the dry riverbeds, the drainage lines. Well reported that elephants can smell underground aquifers and underground water from huge distances away, and they will come down and use their front feet, dig a hole, allow that sand to act as a natural filtration process, and then drink the water that collects there. And very important for other animals as well. You often see lots of butterflies and things fluttering around those sites that elephants have dug at. Yeah, a very common occurrence in winter, but they're clever. They'll often dig close to these um, dolerite dikes, which are vertical intrusions of a different type of rock that will generally, if they are crossing perpendicular to a drainage line, that acts almost like a little underground dam, and you'll find water welling up on the upside of that blockage of that dike. And that'll be the side. The elephants will know this, they'll smell it, and that's where they will choose to dig those holes. It's something we also do. If we're desperate for water, we don't recommend you go and drink out of a dam just because of the potential bacteria and other toxins that may be in there. But if you dig next to the dam and wait for that little hole you dug to slowly fill with water, that water is likely to be a lot cleaner. Still recommended that you boil the water if you have access to fire, just to get rid of any little parasites and things that might be living in there. But if you can't, then that's one of the ways that you can get slightly cleaner water. So Iland have also given up. No, we'll come back later. Oh, Giraffe's going to try his luck again. I'm getting glared at by this elephant on the right. I wonder if there's something off to the left, because both times he has vacated the area, he's been looking to the left as we're watching the camera. Maybe some sort of disturbance there that is causing him some unease. Possibly some human activity off to the left, maybe. Hans, no, I've never seen a cattle egret on an elephant either. Just referring to the fact that saw a couple of oxpeckers sitting on that elephant earlier on this afternoon. Cattle egret's well known for following herds of buffalo, certainly, and domestic cattle. That's sort of what we call a commensalistic relationship, whereas those animals are moving through the grass, they're disturbing insects, which those birds can then benefit from. Um, Yeah, no, never seen one sitting on an elephant, certainly. I'm sure I've probably seen cattle egrets in association with elephants for the reason I just described, the elephants disturbing potential foodstuffs, but never seen one sitting on it. I can't imagine the elephant would tolerate that at all. On the back of hippos, yes, I've seen herons and storks and egrets on the back of hippos in dams, but never seen anything on an elephant except for people doing elephant back safaris. But never say never. There's some more birds alighting. They actually look like starlings. They are very much just taking the opportunity for a roosting position. Could have been that the ones we saw earlier were also starlings. Hard to tell. Beginning to really root for this giraffe if it's still the same one. I want him to have an opportunity. I wonder why all these animals don't gang up and harass the elephants. Very difficult to harass a 6 or 7 ton mammal, though, I suppose. Just watching the elephant's placement of this trunk, he's almost sort of fiddling around on the mud there. I'm trying to see, it looks like there's possibly that's where the pipe is, and that's actually fresh running water that's been exposed. And despite the fact that there is a body of water there, the elephant is very fastidiously collecting that fresh water coming straight out of the pipe. You can see him sort of sucking it up the trunk, filling it slowly, siphoning it in. I'm sure that's what he's doing. It just goes to show you how picky those elephants are about their water, if that is the case. Yeah, I'm sure he's clamping his trunk over just the tip of the exposed pipe there. Yeah, yeah, you can sort of see some reflection of the little trickling bit of water there just above the water line. I wonder if the other one's doing the same thing, if there are a couple of inflows to this dam. Must be. Come on, giraffe, try again. But he's sort of pacing up and down. He's getting impatient now. It's a nice close up of that little red-billed oxpecker, scissoring through the fur, looking for the ticks. This looks like quite a young male giraffe still. Still a lot of tufty hair around his ossicones, so we didn't see any enlarged protrusions above the eye and on the forehead and the base of the neck. Those calcium deposits that male giraffe, at least develop as they get older. You can just see he's looking fairly slim, not quite filled out as much as a full-grown giraffe. Beautiful views of those mountains in the background. Those, and you can say the dark soil from all the volcanic activity along this ridge, the geology of this Chulu Hills National Park. separating Ambercelli and Savo, basically, sort of in the little channel between the two of them. Yeah, definitely some water flowing out of there. See, just taking advantage of that fresh water coming in, or maybe he's had enough. Yeah, so we'll use that water for bathing and mud bath purposes and drink the good stuff. This elephant just giving a gentle nudge to the giraffe again. Yellow duck. Would these elephants be submissive to one ton if he came along because he had big tusks? Um, well, to be honest, we'd have to watch and find out. Just having big tusks does not necessarily mean that you will automatically be the biggest fish in the pond, as it were. A lot of it is to do with inherent knowledge. Similarly sized elephants are not necessarily intimidated by one another just on the basis of their tusk size. I'm sure they'll take it into account in terms of if they actually wanted to get into a conflict. But a lot of it's to do with body language and confidence levels. That's been shown in many animals. I remember reading about an experiment done with cricket, strangely, that not always the biggest cricket would be the most dominant. It's the one that had the most pushy attitude, for want of a better description. So a lot of it will come with confidence and body language and also pheromones as well, testosterone levels. But yeah, just having big tusks doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be the most dominant elephant, although size is certainly important. A lot of it will come down to interactions in the past, memories of uh, dominance interactions that they've had in previous occasions as well. But a younger elephant or a smaller elephant would almost always bow to a larger elephant, certainly. Oh dear, giraffe, zebras, and eland, I think you're going to be waiting a little bit longer. The next wave of elephants has arrived. See slightly more submissive behavior being shown by the one in the middle now, turned his back. We saw that sort of hovering of the front leg, slightly sort of unsure of himself, what he's going to do. Again, just looking at the size of the heads, I would say this one on the right is slightly older. A little bit of submissive behavior being shown there. Yeah, a very old elephant, this one. Look at the tattered ears and those very, very sunken temples in comparison to the one behind it. Respect for one's elders. And again, move out of the way of this other large elephant coming across. You can see that one is a little bit unsure of himself. This one's going to go over and monopolize that little trickle of fresh water that's coming out. So I assume from that we can establish the dominance hierarchy, that it's the one that's just left, followed by the one that's now on the left-hand side of the screen. And we'll have to watch these two interact to try and figure out the next steps. Oh, look at our little lizard in the bottom left-hand corner. Colour-wise, similar to the flat lizards that we get down here in South Africa. That lovely red head and blue body. Likely to be a rainbow agama, I would think. You better move, Mr. Agama. Don't get trodden on by this elephant. Oh, this also looks like a big boy. He's just going to make a beeline and push this one out the way. And look, this one's got small tusks, so I think age certainly, and bulk very, very important. Yeah, that one didn't even put up a fight. The nice things about spending a prolonged period of time at a particular site and watching all those interactions, and yeah, allows us to figure out all these little complex social interactions and hierarchies that a quick glance wouldn't show us. Ooh, you going to try your luck, Zebra? Not sure. Ah, good for you, Zebra. Glad somebody else has got a drink. Our little Agama scampered off as well. Let's see if this gives the giraffe some renewed courage. Finally, well done, giraffe. I've been very invested in this. So now that one's had a drink, let's see if the others will follow. Robin, I'm sorry you're feeling anxious with these giraffe coming down to drink in light of what happened a few weeks ago. The one who got tusked by an elephant for no apparent reason. It was a somewhat harsh reaction, I felt, having seen it a little bit later on. But yeah, I suppose it is why they show such nervousness coming down to water. Not only do they have to worry about potentially being snuck up on by other predators, although there's plenty of animals around that will potentially give the presence of any predator away. But yeah, the unpredictable nature of a protective elephant is always something to consider. I would say why they do reconsider quite a few times, but I guess they're reading the elephant's body language as well, and if they see anything that even looks like mild aggression, they'll think better of it. But these two seem pretty relaxing. The one on the left being such an old bull, I think he's probably seen it all before, and maybe the animals are taking some sort of solace in the fact that they haven't reacted at all to these other ones having a drink, so it's worth chancing one's arm. Yeah, that poor giraffe was vacating the area when it got tusked as well. And from what I recall, that the elephant that did the damage wasn't in must particularly. I'm sure he didn't go out with sort of murderous intentions, was just proving a point that he wanted control over the waterhole. But yeah, it was an extreme measure, put it that way. I see that giraffe who's just come down and is having a drink, the closest one to us. I wonder if that's the one that was being discussed the other day. It looks like it's had a strange little sort of protrusion coming out of its front left knee. It was mentioned, I think Trishala saw it. Interesting if we can have a closer up view, or if it, but it does look like there's a strange sort of, yeah, something sticking out of his knee there. Now, if that was a bone or a broken bone, I can't imagine that the giraffe would be able to exert so much pressure on it when leaning down to have a drink like that. So possibly one of the other suggestions was it could have been a branch or something that got lodged in there whilst running through the bushes. Sure, it's very unpleasant and painful. Nice to have a closer look if we can. But excellent to see that these elephants are happy to share for now. I think we're going to head quickly back down to Founder's Lodge again, see what's happening down there for a little bit. Ah, we've got some sable. Beautiful antelope. The rich black colour of the male on the left. It also looks like a younger male on the right, hasn't quite developed those colorations yet. Beginning to around the neck though. It is lovely down at Founder's Lodge. We get to show you some fairly unique sightings from time to time down here between the rhino and the sable. Things that you don't see all that often, even. Oh, look at the horns on that one. So I've seen wild sable up in Swallow, and I think maybe once or twice, perhaps in Kruger Park, but not for over a decade, I wouldn't have said. But look at those beautiful sweeping horns. They're very low populations of sable, rowan, tsetse, those rarer antelope species in Kruger Park. Not often you get to come across those if you're going to see them. Best places up in the north. But few and far between, unfortunately. It used to be more, but a lot of things have changed. We were discussing it the other day, but particularly with the introduction of, sorry for the dogs barking in the background, the introduction of pumped waterhole, artificial waterhole sources that brought in more competition from things like zebras and buffalo that changed the vegetation composition of the area, also brought in predators, lions following those big herds in, and it had a massively detrimental effect on these antelope species. Oh, look at that! And there's a rhino. Wow, look at that. Sable and rhino in the same picture. Eddie, you wanting to know what the most abundant antelope are in this area? I don't really know the Eastern Cape area very well, so it will be wrong of me to give you an answer for that because I don't know is the simple answer. I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably an impala in terms of sheer numbers and biomass. Um, but yeah, I'm not 100% sure, unfortunately. This looks like a big cow with her offspring. Spectacular. Catherine, you're saying you're lucky enough to see them in Caprivi and Kafui. They are indeed beautiful antelope, not ones that you get to see very often. Minty Chilipao, so again, I wouldn't like to say that South Africa has the officially the greatest variety of antelope species, but we are certainly lucky enough to see lots and lots of different types. It's because of the varied vegetation that we have here between the high veld and the low veld, sweetgrass, sour grass. We have forested areas, we have mountainous areas that are not necessarily dominated by just one type of biome. And when you've got diversity of habitat, then you can have a diversity of species. So there are many, many species of antelope certainly out here, many of which I am yet to see. The blue daker, the smallest of all the antelopes that we have out here. I've never seen one of those, but there are not many of those around either. I think an Orobi I've only ever seen once. Quite a few of these smaller ones. A Sharps Gleesbok. I don't know, I might see one or two of those a year if I'm lucky, if I go to the right places. But so a lot of them are restricted in terms of habitat requirements and availability. Tessabe, for example, I did see a Tessabe up in Madikwe last year when I was doing some work for Wild Earth. I saw Tessabe somewhere around Punda Maria and Pafuri a little while ago, a couple of years. But yeah, these are things that you don't see all that often. But we are very lucky to have such a wide variety of species. I'd say one of my favorite antelopes, not that they occur in South Africa, but I've been lucky enough to see them out in Namibia, is the dik-diks. Tiny, tiny little delicate things. Another one I've never seen, which is more up in Botswana, is the Sitatunga. I've never seen a Sitatunga before. Very regal looking sable. Grey Reebok. That's another one that I have never seen, which apparently can be found in Kruger National Park. So from a fairly reputable website, there are 72 antelope species in Africa, and we get 21 of them just in the Kruger National Park alone. But say grey Reebok is one that's mentioned, which I don't think I've ever seen, or a Sunni. I've never seen a Sunni. The other ones I think I can say that I've ticked off the list. But that's the beauty of it, eh? You never know what you might see. Mindy Tilipai, you said you've seen a gerenuk up in Kenya. Yeah, they are odd looking things on the list for me to tick off one day. So for those of you who don't know what a gerenuk is, I suggest you have a look online at some pictures of it. It's an unusual creature. It kind of looks like an impala-ended neck, like somebody's racked the impala basically and tried to make it look like a giraffe. And they're known for standing on their back feet and feeding quite high up in bushes and things. But yeah, that sort of typical orange coloration of an impala, but with a very elongated neck. Lady Macbeth, you said you had seen a Sunni. Well, say you are one up on me. Just have to keeping an eye out for one of those. Don't know much about them at all. In fact, I would probably need a book to recognize it, to be honest. I'd have to refamiliarize myself with what they actually do look like. A black-headed heron. Very nice to see. Undulating in the breeze there. Oh, it's lovely to see a black-headed heron. We see a lot of grey herons, but not often we get to see a black-headed heron. It is quite a common species, but again, I don't know if I must have seen a black-headed heron in Kruger Park, but 9 out of every 10 herons are going to be grey herons. They seem to dominate that environment. It's so special to see sable and rhino together. Miranda, you're also saying that it was lovely. It's lovely to see rhino with their horns and in their natural habitat. Oh, there's a little sable. So yeah, those horns, of course, have been trimmed. They have been dehorned, and they'll be slowly growing back for such time as they are dehorned again. So they do grow back. It sort of obviously depends on the animal, maybe 5, 6, 7 centimeters a year. Oh, Lady Macbeth, you saw your Sunni down in KZN in the sand forest. Well, if that is their preferred habitat, that would explain why I haven't seen one. I have been into a couple of those sand forests down in KZN, but not for many, many years. It's not an area that I get down to very often. It's about a here from Hoedspruit, where I am, down to those areas. You're looking at probably sort of a 10-hour drive or so. Beautiful scimitar-like horns this big sable bull has got on the left. And Jackie, darling, you would love to see a shoebill. Yes, as would I, but that's a very specific habitat requirements. You pretty much have to go on an organized trip to go and see one of those. And from my understanding, it requires a 2, 3, 4 hour hike through swampland in order to go and find sort of the right habitat and hope that you get to see one. But yeah, they are very odd looking things, prehistoric birds, but yeah, very much on the bucket list. Apparently, my bucket list is growing. Every time I do this, people ask me about things, and I think about things I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to tick these animals off. But could be worse ways to spend a life, I suppose. Speaking of rare and unusual birds, a friend of mine managed to get a photograph not far from here, along the Olifants River, a couple of weeks ago of a Pell's fishing owl. So very nice to know that there's at least one in the area. I was lucky enough when I lived up in and was working in Tanzania in Katavi National Park. We had a breeding pair of Pell's fishing owls just on the river in front of the camp when we used to see them fly up and down the river at dusk almost every night. Never found a nesting site, but occasionally did manage to get them in a tree somewhere. And did have a few photos, but I think I've lost them all now as hard drives have given up the ghost throughout the years. But I know that's a mecca bird for many people. There used to be one that hung out at the Pafuri Bridge in Kruger Park that I saw on a few occasions when I was working for eco training up there. But I don't think that one has been seen for many years now. You can see what this heron is doing. He's actually doing some preening work there. We were talking with the ostrich um, about preening and the fact that the ostrich doesn't have a preen gland, and I'm fairly confident from my ongoing research that they do not even have that powder down. They rely purely on dust bathing, which makes perfect sense. Those feathers not needing to be in such good condition. But herons are one of the few birds that do have that powder down, that continuously growing feathers on the chest that create that sort of almost like talc, which is then passed in between the feathers. And that's exactly what that black heron is doing up there. We saw him poking around on his chest, accessing that down to then spread amongst the feathers. A pair of shell ducks and a blacksmith lapwing. Oh, sorry, everybody, we seem to have lost founders for now. So we've taken a trip right the way across the continent over to Fukukoyu in Etosha in Namibia. One or two springboks circling the dam. Surprising to not see any elephants here today. We've had lots here over the last week or so. I have no doubt they will be back. There's something in the water. But it is a great way to spend a day if you've got the patience, particularly this time of year when the animals are underwater stressed. Just go and plonk yourself down next to a waterhole, have a spot of lunch, a little picnic, some water, and yeah, I'll just wait to see what comes down. You never know. I've had some amazing experiences just watching waterholes for a couple of hours and just seeing what comes to visit. The other day when I was in Kruger, I sat next to a waterhole for half an hour. We had was about probably close to 200 impalas milling around, a few waterbuck and wildebeest whilst we were there. A herd of elephants came down to drink, and then doing a quick scan of the surrounding area with my binoculars, we discovered a male lion sitting under a tree watching all the action unfold. So they really are epicenters of activity, particularly this time of year. And it's very relaxing just sitting next to a waterhole. Not only that, you've got all the aquatic bird life, and then lots of birds coming down for a bath or a drink. Little waxbills and firefinches and petilias. Lots of things taking advantage of these important resources. And of course, lots of things happening underneath the surface as well. All right, sounds like we're going to head back up to Oldonyo in Kenya, see if those giraffes are still having a drink. The Ireland have had their opportunity as well. Since nobody wants to get too close to the elephant on the far side, I wonder if that's still the same one we saw earlier. If it is the big old boy, so he seems to be very tolerant in his old age, so he can't be bothered with the grief. Very, very nice to see the eland and the giraffe coming down. Shame we didn't get a closer look at that one with the potentially injured knee. I'm pretty sure that was the one. It did look as if there was sort of a something sticking out of it. But I can't imagine that, say, it was a skeletal injury from that giraffe. I wouldn't have thought he'd be able to put so much pressure and weight on it, but I don't see that giraffe in the out of these three, but we'll definitely keep an eye out for. I think it's him or her, I'm not even sure. But not something you see every day. You've got a lovely dewlap from those ilons hanging down under their throats. This elephant on the far side is lacking a tusk as well on the right. But I've just been informed we're almost done again, unfortunately. We've only got about a minute or so left, so it's about that time when I thank everybody for all of your questions and comments that you've had coming through. I hope you've enjoyed today. Sorry we had one or two feed issues, but how special was it to see Rhino and Sable down at the Founders, and some very interesting things going on here at Oldonio with the other animals trying to find their way through to the water. But I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Don't forget to stay tuned for all the other wonderful content that we'll be bringing your way. I will be back, I think, probably only next month now, so my colleagues and fellow naturalists will be taking over for the next few weeks. But lovely to spend another couple of hours with you all, and I'm sure we will chat soon. Have a lovely day.